Now, as far as the use or non-use of nuclear weapons is concerned, we've got the nuclear doctrine, which says it all. Just the day before yesterday, I spoke to the heads of news agencies, and I explained this to them. I said, we've got the nuclear doctrine, which says that we can only use the nuclear weapons in emergency cases when our sovereignty and territorial integrity are threatened. I do not think we're there.
It is quite easy to guess the geographical location of the Russian military targets, in case the short press release of the White House turns out to be a reality. Then, almost all European capitals will be under our missile scope, from Kaliningrad to Berlin, Warsaw, all the Balts, Paris, Bucharest, and Prague. The American base in Germany at Ramstein will also be targeted, and special attention will be granted to Britain, our traditional enemy, since a significant part of the Russian Northern Fleet will work against it, by targeting not only London but also Manchester, Birmingham, the largest naval base at Devonport, and Clyde in Scotland. The UK is a very easy target, so, afterward, its civilization will collapse. The Political Economy Revisited, or The Importance of History in the Geopolitics of a Non-Western-Centered Redistribution of the Means of Social Wealth Production. From Zhou Enlai to Mao Zedong, from Kwame Nkrumah to Jomo Kenyatta, Julius Nyerere, Léopold Sédar Senghor, and Patrice Lumumba, from Gamal Abdel Nasser to Muammar Gaddafi, from Nelson Mandela and Jawaharlal Nehru to Fidel Castro, the 20th century brought about decolonization, and with it the Third World aspiration to embrace a non-Western-centered appraisal of history. Outside of imperial Europe and its subsequent G7-centered and NATO-centered neocolonial economic system, colonization set the stage for the birth and rise of a vindication of the Third World's social and cultural dignity to a never-before-seen historical scale and scope, which has not yet been accomplished.
Mali, qui a collaboré avec la Russie depuis 1962. Nous avons au minimum 10 000 cadres maliens qui ont été formés par l'Union soviétique sans que les Russes cherchent à tirer profit de ces formations-là. Même dans la situation actuelle dans laquelle le Mali se trouve, la Russie a aidé. Je ne dis pas qu'il y a des collaborations gratuites. Dans toute collaboration, chacun cherche quelque chose. Mais si ça se fait dans le respect, on fait de sorte que chacun puisse gagner. Donc, c'est ce qu'on a vu avec la Russie. Au moment où nous avons été formés, je dirais que la Russie ne gagnait rien. L'Union soviétique ne gagnait rien. On aidait nos pays parce que nos premiers dirigeants voulaient vraiment former les Maliens à décoloniser nos esprits. Il fallait tout faire pour couper ce cordon-là entre nous et le colonisateur. Et la Russie les a aidés dans ce sens-là pour nous permettre de nous en sortir.
By extension, this willingness for vindication fostered the worldwide rewriting of colonial and pre-colonial history and the adoption of philosophical and moral premises for national emancipation projects. Both trends took the stage when many countries adopted Third World-centered development policies, often with an eye to the Marxian political economy. Nonetheless, the post-World War II decolonization movements mostly crashed against the wall of the reaction exerted by the former colonialist rulers, in various manners. They induced local corruption to gain local agency through their minions. They deployed financial resources to lending operations which established debt traps, devices holding tight the vulnerable economies of their former colonies, and finally, they also organized and supervised the anti-communist military oppression, in Africa, Latin America, and Asia. Corruption, debt, and oppression gained strength from the collusion among security agencies, corporations, and governments at the helm of the G7's led spheres of influence over their Third World puppets. The Cold War's ending with Western wholesale victory only meant the consolidation of an increasingly financialized neocolonialism, also known as globalization. And with it came the onset of the profit-driven demolition of state-owned assets and state economic capabilities, together with the renunciation of the sovereignty-motivated quest to abandon the debt trap issuance of bank-owned currency. Today, the privileged population in formerly imperial, G7, territories began enduring the same profit-driven demolition of state-owned assets and state economic capabilities, formerly known as the Western welfare state, and now supplanted by the so-called austerity governance. The implosion of the Soviet bloc allowed the US, NATO, and the EU to advance their neoliberal social and financial agenda aimed at depriving all people, worldwide, of actual constitutionally codified social guarantees that decolonization international movements had fought for.
For the war of high intensity. I hope I make myself understood. It's not just terrorism. Open your eyes. It's much more than that. It's a war of decolonization. And you must have heard these last days some other generals who made us understand that if they fail to come with their armies to recolonize us, they have to come. Well, prepare for the war of high intensity. Either they will come themselves, or they will go through their local valets who are here to try to disturb our peace. So whoever, I say whoever, whether it's terrorism or any other army that must come to disturb our peace, we must prepare to welcome them in the long term and intensely. That's why I tell you, prepare for the war of high intensity. And we will follow these trainings. We will move on to other groups to intensify the operations and try to pacify. These are the steps. And this terrorism will be defeated because they know that it will be defeated, that they are preparing either at the local level here or to come with their armies to fight us. Well, we will prepare to welcome them.
Western countries have long relied on their technological advance and their superiority in the use of violence to impose their domination on other countries. Professor Alexis Habyarimai, a political analyst and senior researcher at the University of Johannesburg School of Economics, told Sputnik, commenting on his takeaways from Russian President Vladimir Putin's speech at the plenary session of the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum on Friday. With the considerable technological catch-up observed since the second half of the 20th century, but above all, with the technological sophistication of the Russian defense industry, Western countries are no longer able to impose their domination without challenge, Habyarimai said. The West has traditionally also used the Bretton Woods institutions to dominate and discipline developing countries, according to the scholar, but with the emergence of alternative sources of development finance, e.g., the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank or the New Development Bank, the financial grip on developing countries has been loosened as well. The significance of the West in the world economy and in the world population is in inexorable decline, and no matter how much violence they are deploying to keep their domination, the world has already changed. The global South won't accept abusive and traumatic domination, and it is already showing it in different parts of the world. The multipolar New World Order being constructed by Russia and other BRICS countries, by providing alternative poles of economic and diplomatic power, will certainly benefit countries from the global South and lower the pressure from the current hegemon, Habyarimai emphasized. With that said, for countries in the U.S. backyard, such as Bolivia, Venezuela, or Cuba, it will remain extremely difficult to extricate themselves from the stifling influence of Washington. That is why they need more support from the other emerging poles, he added. The growth in the Russian economy, outpacing Western economies, is spectacular, and it shows that the 15,000 sanctions applied by the West have blown back on them, British academic and author Rodney Atkinson told Sputnik, commenting on his takeaways from President Putin's speech at the plenary session of the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. The West is losing 4 wars in one. Economically, in trade and debt, financially, by de-dollarization and international payment systems, militarily, in Ukraine in battle and by comparison of weapons systems, and geopolitically, with a massive loss of influence around the world, Atkinson explained. Even before the 20-year expansion towards Russia and the 2014 Maidan-instigated war, European imperial ambitions and U.S. neocon aggression were unpopular. Now that the global South has witnessed recent events, and the BRICS offer an alternative while the U.S. has descended into record debt and industrial weakness, it is tough for the West to recover its influence. Plagued by geopolitical ignorance, financially irresponsible policies, and weak leadership, the U.S. and its allies may not even survive as one of the poles of the multipolar world, the Observer predicted. Atkinson stressed the madness of the West's logic of slapping sanctions against a country as large as Russia with its abundance of food, mineral, and energy resources. What's worse for the West is that Moscow has been trailblazing a path to independence which can be emulated by other nations. Import substitution by Russia, plus the unwillingness of Western companies to leave Russia. For instance, 1,600 international companies have left Russia since 2022, but there remain more than 2,100 left, and the substitution of national currencies for dollar-based trade, i.e., rupee, yuan, ruble, all these facts show the global south that there are alternatives to a Western-based system hell-bent on sanctions, Atkinson said. Russia's economy is moving east, and that provides big opportunities for China. John Gong, a professor of economics at Beijing's University of International Business and Economics, told Sputnik, commenting on the substance of President Putin's speech at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. I could imagine, for example, that infrastructure investment in Russia offers tons of opportunities for Chinese companies. Chinese companies may be participating, and Chinese companies may be providing vital equipment, materials, and products that could be used in this infrastructure build-out. So I think, cooperation between the two sides has a lot of potential. This is a long-term strategy. It's not going to be just transitional, it's going to stay there for many decades to come, Dr. Gong explained. Russia's pivot away from the West and toward Asia, Latin America, and Africa means the creation of new infrastructure as an important theme of economic development, according to the professor, with the Northern Sea Route, in particular, a key pillar of Moscow's strategy. From China's perspective, this represents a technologically viable economical transportation route to Europe and other parts of the world. We all understand the repercussions that the turmoil in the Middle East is causing for a large trading nation like China. The unsafe routes in the Red Sea are cutting China's shipping volume and also jacking up shipping costs. And I think this northern Arctic shipping route provides a viable and also economic means. For much of the year, Gong said, Russia's moves, including the reorientation of trade away from the dollar and toward the yuan, the rupee, and other currencies, are, in some sense, something of Washington's creation, according to The Observer, with the U.S.'s short-sighted sanctions and secondary sanctions policies not only shifting trade to new currencies but giving rise to alternative payment and trade settlement systems.
What I was taught, going back to 1985-86, was that Russia was a very difficult place to work in, that it was considered one of the hardest places in the world. But what you actually have is I think it's easy to work here from an intelligence standpoint. If your intelligence goal is to make relationships with people and to actually observe and try to learn about the society as opposed to showing up with preconceived notions. Because it's easier for North Americans to interact in Russia because we look alike. You can't just identify somebody by physical characteristics and say, oh, they're an American necessarily, unless, depending on how they dress. But what you see is that the Russian people are very open, very communicative, and really the ultimate, it depends on what kind of intelligence activity we're talking about. If the goal of the intelligence activity is to understand the other society, are they doing anything that's going to, quote, create a threat for you? Then from that standpoint, Russia is sort of, I'd call it an open book, because you see that Russia is not creating a threat to Europe or to the United States or anyone. If your goal is to try to penetrate Russian society to create disorder and sow disruption, I think that would be difficult because the Russian people, I think, are shrewd enough to sort of smell that out right away, that if they're dealing with a foreigner, that they're not sincere, that they don't have their best interests in mind. I see why there are so many Westerners that want to move to Russia, because it is really, it's a land of opportunity now, in a way that America once was during the 19th century and into the early 20th century, but it's been closed off. It's become sort of a rigid society that caters to elites, whereas Russia, in a very sort of contradictory manner, is catering to creating new opportunities for people who are just willing to work. The United States is not wanting to isolate Russia. The United States wants to destroy Russia. And I think it is critical, essential, that the Russian people understand that. It is not the American people that want to destroy Russia, but the American government, that is certainly its intent, to force the breakup of the Russian government, to bring it down. Because I've described it as the West wants to rape Russia, take all of its natural resources, use it exclusively for the United States. The problem we have is that the United States, over the course of the last 25 years, has suffered from what I call narcissistic personality disorder. They are reliving, reinventing the Greek mythology of Narcissus. They see themselves as the most important, the strongest, the wealthiest, and that everybody else is of secondary or tertiary concern. And that's what makes it so dangerous. Yeah. So, and here's where it's so strange. Russia is not taking the bait. Russia is not submitting to that narcissistic demand. And in the process, Russia is forging relations. We have 134 countries here at the International Economic Forum. And the one thing that the Russian people, it's sort of part of their nature. They don't look at other countries as being inherently inferior, as secondary or third-rate citizens. They genuinely treat other countries with respect as equals, because it's sort of, if you will, the old principle out of Christianity, treat others as you want to be treated. And the Russians, I think, embody that. So that's, the United States it's completely now divorced from reality. It thinks it's isolating Russia, and what it's really doing is it's isolating itself.